Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you could join us today. Um, Last Friday marked my 30th anniversary in this business. And 2 months ago, I would have never expected I would be spending it the way I am now, basically working from home in my master closet and working about as hard as I did in my first decade of building my business. But I would have never imagined to be spending it here with this. But I'm happy to report that there's a silver lining in most clouds, and the silver lining of having almost been hit by a couple of hurricanes the last few years, we put together a great disaster preparedness plan, and I'm happy to report that it's fully functioning. We literally unplugged. I've got my same computer and monitors here in my master closet. I won't comment if my wife appreciates that or not, but nonetheless, I've taken over some real estate here, and I've literally unplugged everything in the office. We plugged in here, plugged into our network back at the office, and my team and I have been fully functioning, working as hard as we can work for the last 6 or 7 weeks, working remotely. So I'm happy to report that we're here to serve you, and everybody is safe and healthy so far. So I wanted to start with a bit of a positive focus. Some of you that joined us last week, some of these are repetitive, others aren't. But I asked some friends and clients to share with me some positive things that have come about from these experiences. And one gentleman mentioned, he said, God has blessed me with great health and a healthy family, and he still has a job and Social Security. So that's all great things to be thankful for. Others have commented about the opportunity to spend time with family and refocus on what's really important in life. I think in the first 20 years of my marriage, 25 years with my wife, we probably went on 3 bike rides together, and we've probably done 15 in the last 6 weeks. So that's been a great outcome of this. And then someone who works at MUSC was commenting that the students who have not yet graduated providing childcare to the frontline workers that are in the ER taking care of patients. And then we had the pleasure this week on Monday to provide lunch from MEX1 for about 30 ER staff, doctors, nurses, and staff people from MUSC. And last week or the week before, I think we did Roper Emergency Room downtown. So here's some of the, I don't know, nurses, doctors, staff getting the lunch that we had dropped off to MUSC this week. So we were thankful to be able to uh, show some appreciation and some support to those caregivers, those doctors, nurses, and staff that are really on the front line and really risking their lives for the benefit of others. Um, you always hear you want to start out with some jokes. I have zero creativity, and as you may tell from my presentation today, I'm not a news broadcaster either. So I took some of the jokes that were in our weekly market commentary and add them to today. There's so much going on about homeschooling, but someone said here, if you had asked me what the hardest part of battling a global pandemic would be, I would have never guessed teaching elementary school math. And then homeschooling update, day 9. Today we did math. If you have 3 kids and they're roughly awake for roughly 13 hours a day, and you're trying to work from home, how many times do you hear the word snack? I can't imagine my school gives my children the number of snack breaks they seem to need throughout the day, here at home. So anyway, a little humor to get us going. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you find this information to be first and foremost comforting, secondly informative, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to spend with us as we go through just a update of what's going on with coronavirus, a market economic update, and some of the law changes that have come into play that affect each and every one of us, really, for the most part. Want to remind everybody, if there's any questions, to please feel free to email Mary during our event, and we'll do our best to try to catch them during the event. Otherwise, we'll get back to you afterwards. One came in beforehand regarding giving business owner giving bonuses to an employee during the PPP period, which is an 8-week period from the date the money hits your bank account. And just comment there. It's very complicated. I'm researching some of the details into that, and we'll get back to you tomorrow or Monday. So today I've got a couple of colleagues that are joining me here, and that is Justin Duff, who's an attorney and director of advanced planning with Commonwealth Financial Network, one of my business partners. He's going to give us an update today on the CARES Act and the impact that that's having on the economy and some of the rules and regulations regarding that. It's very complicated. It's very complex. And literally, when I'm talking to people about it, they are literally giving me a time and date stamp, meaning, Bobby, I gave you this answer on May 7th at 4:06 p.m. Because it's very likely tomorrow that answer may change or certainly be modified. So we're staying on top of it to help keep you abreast of any opportunities or issues. And then I have with us Peter Essley. Peter's a CFA, and for those of you who don't know that acronym, I'm proud of my CFP designation and some of my others, but I think CFA is like a CFP times 10. No offense to me and Justin, proudly wearing our CFP badges. And then before I get in here, we got another question here that was submitted. One of the law changes had to deal with required minimum distributions for somebody who's in the period of time where they're having to take required minimum distributions out of their 401ks or IRAs. It used to be over 70, now it's over age 72. That just changed December of 19 to age 72. If you've already taken it in January before they change the law to say you don't have to take it, is there a way to put it back in? And there's not a way if it's over 60 days since you took it out. The IRS hasn't provided any additional guidance on that. It's quite unlikely that they'll change that, simply because that was before Corona for the most part in the United States, and that was certainly before the stock market drop. One of the reasons, in a great way, that they're doing this is that somebody who hasn't taken out the RMD, well, maybe back up. You always hear you should never sell stocks when they're down or sell any investments when they're down. Well, if you had your IRAs subject to stocks and almost anything in the market was down, and you were forced to sell to take out your RMD, that would be very detrimental to your portfolio and detrimental to you. So the IRS is allowing you to not take that out if you haven't already taken out. And if you have taken it out, you had 60 days to put it back in. So anyway, that's a answer there to that question. So I'm going to kick us off here with jumping into our theme. Our theme today is beach balls, traffic, and sunscreen. And that may sound a little strange coming from a financial planning and investment standpoint, but I think you'll see how that flows through our discussion today. So this is a look at historical ups and downs, and this screen, this slide in the color contrast says a lot, and the number says a lot, and it really does relate to a beach ball, believe it or not, which I'll get to. So this looks back 1926 through very recent times, 2019. And what you see is the blue represents the period of time and the amount the stock market went up, where the red is the opposite of that, the period of time and the depth that the stock market went down. And if you look at it just at first glance, there's a whole lot more blue on the screen than there is red. So we all know that markets are volatile. As I said 4,000 times in my 30-year career, that the stock market is very inefficient in a short period of time, but it's very efficient over a long period of time. So short period of time, in my opinion, people really shouldn't invest in the stock market money that they don't plan to leave there for at least a 4-year period of time. Some could argue now that could be shorter because of the drop and the opportunity it creates, but nonetheless, over time, typically 4 or 5 years is the minimum you would want to invest it, because in any 1 to 5 year period of time, it's very unpredictable whether the market would go down and you would lose money or go up and you would make money. But over the long period of time, it's very efficient over that period of time. So the beach ball analogy here is that you see and if you think about it, if you're in a pool and you have a beach ball and you push it down underwater, if you push it down a little bit and let go, it kind of comes back up to the surface. If you push it down way under the water and you let it go, it kind of shoots way up and comes back up. And that's what the stock market is proven time and time again in the times that it has dropped historically and recovered. So that's our theme for the for the beach balls. Bear with me one second here as I pull up on my other screen. Okay. And so slide 2, markets response to crisis. So this is a portfolio that's 60% stocks, 40% bonds. In our world, that's what we would consider a moderate portfolio. Many retirees maybe in that 60-40 allocation, all the 65-35 or 80-20 allocation. But this is a 60-40 portfolio, 60% stocks, 40% bonds, looking at how the market has responded to crisis in the past. And if you look back at the crash in 1987, this line at 19% shows the return of the market 1 year after the crash, and then 3 years after the crash, and then 5 years after the crash. And you'll see that theme continue. In very few instances, time hasn't healed. And so, if you look at this 3-year period, up 23%, 25%. The dot-com crash, it was only up 2%, but 5 years after the crash, it was up 50%. That's about 10% a year, a little less with compounding, which I think most people would be happy with as a long-term return. So, and then if you look at, we often hear this time is different. There's been so many market drops in history, and so many times you can point to how, quote unquote, this time is different, with the premise that maybe the market won't recover or won't recover the way it has in the past. And my gosh, you think of the terrorist attack in 2001, it just unbelievable event in world history, and look how resilient the market was to, 5 years after, to be up 81%, as they literally tried to destroy the financial center of the greatest country in America. So the market has been resilient over time, is what the theme is from this one. And then I want the next one to share with you. A lot of people during these times, and fortunately not my clients, it's interesting, like it was probably 10 days into this and we were working 14-hour days, just nonstop, trying to think of ways to capitalize on this opportunity and what we need to do for each and every one of our clients, and making all kinds of spreadsheets and tabs of these people for this. And it got so volatile, we literally had tabs. What happens for people we need to act on if the market goes down, people we need to act on if the market goes up, because it was so volatile, we didn't know which way it was going to go the next day, and we were making all these plans for what we need to do. And it was about like 10 days in, and one person emailed me and just said, hey, I'm just checking in, because you may be getting busy, you may be getting, a lot of people calling and concerned. And really, we hadn't, and I'm proud of that, because I think we've done a great job. I've always said, I love what I do with a passion. Y'all know that, but so much of what I do is educating people, right? And so I feel like it must be a testament that I've done a good job of educating people, because nobody really called saying, hey, I want to get out for a reason that didn't make sense. Now, if you own a business and you got business revenue just went to zero, you got to do some things to make sure you got liquidity. But just in general, you want to stay the course. You want to stay the course and have contingency plans for times like this, even before it happens. Hard to predict with this kind of extreme situation, but nonetheless. So this just shows how reacting can hurt performance, and trying to time and maybe when getting out. But if you look at the market return from 1990 to 2019, the stock market over that period of time, if you'd have put in $1,000 in the beginning, would have grown to $17,000 at the end of that period of time, which is ironically the 9.96% return. Most of long-term average of the U.S. stock market is right at 10%. It's funny how it kind of regresses to that mean over time. But if you'd have just bought and held, you would have earned a 9.6% return. But in that same period of time, if you miss just the one day of the market, it costs you almost $2,000 in return. And that's just an example of how fast the market can jump back up, and just an example of how it's really impossible to time the market, to build a investment strategy based upon timing the market over a long period of time, because you've got to be right so many times. You got to be right to know when to get out, know when to get back in, then know when to get out again. And so this just speaks to staying the course. And if you miss just the very best 5 days, you can see the impact going from a $17,000 value to an $11,000 value. So this just speaks to staying the course. So with that, you've heard enough from me, for the moment anyway. I'll be back. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Justin, and Justin's going to take over and tell us about the CARES Act.
Thanks, Bobby. I'll tell you, as I'm trying to get my screen share going here, I have a 2-year-old and a 10-month-old, and I hear the word snack probably 100 times a day. So I feel your pain there. There we go. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me today, and thank you to Bobby for putting this together. My name is Justin Duff. I run the advanced planning team at Commonwealth. And the advanced planning team is a team of 10 individuals. 6 of us are attorneys. The other members are CFPs or have CFP equivalent designations. And our role is really to support Bobby with research and consulting across the financial planning world. So you can really think of us as an extension of Bobby's team. We're there to support him in any way that he needs. And the same with Peter's team as well. For my piece, I'm going to talk about the major legislation that's occurred in the last 60 days. With an emphasis on the CARES Act, which is the largest economic stimulus package ever passed. So it was a big one. Our agenda is going to include a timeline of the different legislation, an overview of the recovery rebates. Those are the cash payments that taxpayers are receiving, or I should say Americans are receiving, because you actually don't have to pay taxes. The effect of the legislation on RMDs, and an overview of the Paycheck Protection Program for small businesses. And we'll look at a graphic that's going to help everybody understand how that works a little bit better. So over the last few months, we've seen really a slew of government action, all of which is meant to mitigate the effects of the virus on the economy. So to take you through those, in phase 1, that was the Coronavirus and Response Supplemental Appropriations Act. $8.3 billion was poured into this program. And this was basically an appropriations bill to fund the Department of Health and Human Services. So they have the money for the staffing and the ability to start fighting the virus. So it was really a funding mechanism. Phase 2 was HR 6201, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, and that totaled $105 billion. A lot of money, but it didn't get a lot of fanfare, probably because it was followed up by the CARES Act, which we'll talk about. But this shaped sick leave for employees and employers, and it basically had two major provisions. One that expanded short-term paid sick leave, and another that expanded family medical leave for longer COVID-related absences. So an important bill that not a lot of people have heard of, but it's really doing great work to help people that have been afflicted with the disease or have family members that have been afflicted as well. Phase 3 was HR 748, and this is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act. That was $2.3 trillion with the T. This is where we're going to spend most of our time today, and this is what you're seeing in the news. Briefly, in between phases 1, 2, and 3, we received several IRS notices that ultimately resulted in changing the tax filing deadline for all taxpayers. And that ended up being individuals, corporations, trusts, and estates. So basically everybody, and it moved the filing deadline to July 15th. An important distinction here, this was a postponement. So there are no penalties or interest for filing late up to July 15th. So that was a good provision that helped a lot of people. All right, the CARES Act. So the CARES Act, as I mentioned, is a massive $2.3 trillion stimulus bill. So I want to take you through the major provisions that might affect you. Starting with the recovery rebates. These are the cash payments that citizens have been receiving. They are $1,200 for a single filer with a phase out between $75,000 and $100,000. For a married filing joint couple or family, it's $2,400, so double the single filer. With a phase out, that's also double, $150,000 to $200,000. On top of that, you're getting an additional $500 per dependent child. So that brings it a family of 4 that meets the income requirements to $3,400. The phase out. So the way the phase out works is the formula is it's 5% of the amount that exceeds the beginning threshold number. So what that means, I'll use an example here. If you're married filing jointly and your income is $175,000, you're halfway through that phase out, so it's going to reduce it proportionally by 50%. So in that case, if you were getting $2,400, you would get $1,200 as a married couple. If you filed your 2019 return already, the government's going to be using that return to determine eligibility based on your income. If you have not filed your 2019, they're going to go back to 2018. And I'm pretty sure they'll go back to 2017 as well if you haven't filed. Social Security recipients, if you're in this group, you're going to receive it automatically. The administration has the info on file to pay even without a tax return. And if you do not file because your income is low enough so that you're not required to do so, you will need to file a basic return. So the important point here is you don't need earned income to be eligible. Some recipients are on Social Security disability, they're still going to receive checks. The manner in which you're going to receive checks, if you receive direct deposit for your tax refunds, government's going to use that info to deposit the stimulus payment directly into your bank account using the same information. And if you receive a paper check, either for your Social Security earnings or for your tax returns, then you should expect a paper check for the stimulus payments as well. And there have been delays on that. The direct payments started going in a couple weeks ago, but there have been significant delays on the paper checks. Okay, RMD rule changes. I want to spend some time on here because there's been some significant changes under the CARES Act. Briefly, an RMD is a required minimum distribution. If you don't know what that acronym means, that is when you reach age 72 now, you're required to take a payment each year from the IRA, and that's based on your actuarial life expectancy. So for 2020, RMDs are completely waived. They decided the market was depressed. A lot of people don't need this money. They'd rather leave it in their IRA and let it recover within the IRA wrapper. So they did a temporary waiver for 2020. This applies to RMDs for inherited IRAs as well. That's an important point. So if you inherited an IRA from a non-spouse, maybe from a parent or a sibling, you can waive your RMD from that as well. And if you turned 70 and a half last year and delayed taking your first 2019 RMD until 2020, you can skip last year's RMD that you haven't taken and also the 2020 RMD. So there's a double benefit for people that find themselves in that camp. So what if you already took an RMD and want to put it back? This is a big question that we've been getting. Easiest way to do this is to roll it back in using what's called the 60-day rule. And if you take it out, you have 60 days to roll it back in. And note, the 60-day rule was extended for 2020. So anyone that took an RMD by at February 1st or later, you can roll it back by July 15th. Yeah, so we have an extension of that 60-day rule. I do want to make a couple technical points here. And of course, if you find yourself being affected by these technical issues, Bobby can discuss your particular situation with you. We have a once per year rollover rule. So if you are taking your RMD in monthly installments, you can only put one back in. There's no relief from the once per year rule as of today. This also means you can't use this option if you've rolled funds from one IRA to another within the last 365 days. It's an unintended consequence of somebody that's used that rule. 401ks to IRAs, if you leave an employer and roll it to an IRA, and vice versa, if you roll an IRA back into a 401k, it does not count for this rule. So that's a benefit. Also of note, this still does not help people, and I think, Bob, you addressed this in the opening questions. It doesn't help people who took an RMD in January and want to put the money back in because of this waiver for 2020. So unless the IRS issues more relief here, that's the rule that we're stuck with. Important point here, if tax was withheld on your RMD and you want to put it back in, you're still able to roll the gross amount back into the IRA. So an example to unpack that, let's say you had a $100,000 RMD requirement and they withheld 20% for taxes, so you got a check for $80,000. Because they've now waived the 2020 RMD, if you're within the 60-day rollover rule or back to February 1st, you can put that back in, but you don't put the 80,000. You can put the 80,000 back in, but you can actually put up to 100,000 back in to make the IRA whole. The issue here is that there's no way to recover the 20% withholding in taxes. So you took $100,000 RMD, they took 20,000 out of that and gave you 80. You put the 100,000 back, so you're down 20,000 in taxes here. The way to reconcile that is when you file your 2020 tax returns, you'll be able to recover that overtax payment with a larger refund. So expect an extra 20 grand in next year's refund. Okay, just a couple more slides here. I want to spend some time on the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP. This is getting a lot of press right now, and it's the cornerstone provision of the CARES Act. It was designed to support the small business community. Best example I've heard is that it's revenue replacement to allow a business to hibernate through a period of disruption, and it's really meant to keep businesses going and to save jobs. To be eligible for the PPP, you have to have 500 or fewer employees, so designed for small businesses, with some exceptions for certain businesses like restaurants and with multiple locations. This is a big one. You have to sign a good faith certification stating that the current economic conditions, let me start this slowly. The current economic conditions necessitate the loan to support ongoing business operations. That's a very, very important certification because they didn't provide a lot of guidance on what that means. And the SBA and the Treasury have come out with a slightly more aggressive stance on what businesses should be applying for this. You might have seen in the news that the Los Angeles Lakers applied for one of these loans. Ruth's Chris applied for a loan. Shake Shack applied for a loan. Now, they all got a loan. They were publicly shamed. They were called out by the president and the secretary, and they actually paid the money back because it was really not designed for them. No fault of their own. At the beginning, the statute gave us a really vague standard, but through clarifying points from the Treasury and the SBA, we realized it's not really meant for those large corporations. How much can be borrowed? The formula allows the business owner to borrow up to 2.5 times the average monthly payroll to a $10 million maximum. Payroll is defined as wages and salaries up to $100,000, and it also includes the cost of health insurance and retirement plan contributions on behalf of the employees, as well as state and local taxes assessed on compensation. So think of that as you're borrowing 2.5 times your payroll, and then you're going to have 2 months to spend it. The term of the loan is going to carry an interest rate of 1% and 2 years to pay it back. There is a loan forgiveness provision. This is the biggest part of this that people took note of. The CARES Act states that the amount borrowed can be forgiven if you meet certain requirements. So it's got to be spent on qualified expenses. So that's payroll, rent, utilities, and mortgage interest. It must be spent in the 8 weeks following the date you received a disbursement of the funds. You're going to need to certify your expenses with the bank at the end of the 8 weeks. And if all of these are met, the government forgives the loan and it is non-taxable. So it's a tremendous program for small business owners. They can essentially borrow a couple months worth of their payroll and expenses, spend it on payroll and expenses for the next 2 months to get themselves through this, through the pandemic and the downturn and the stay in place orders, and then hopefully open up at the end of that, and all of that money is forgiven by the government with no taxes. So it's a really tremendous program. My final slide here, I just want to use a graphic to try to explain those time frames, because this is a fairly complex program. The orange portion is the measuring period for calculating how much you can borrow. So depending on the type of business, this will either be the 12-month trailing period leading up to when you receive the loan, or to make it easier, you can use 2019 numbers. The green arrow in the middle is the date you received the borrowed money. And the second green arrow is the 8-week period after the receipt of the funds. So that's when you need to spend the money. And then the blue section is the remainder of the 2 years on the loan. If you don't achieve loan forgiveness, it's still a great deal. You know, it's a 1% loan with a 2-year payback. You can't get a loan for 1% nowadays. So that in itself is a tremendous benefit to businesses that need liquidity. So I think that's a fair amount of dense information. So I'm going to turn it back to Bobby, and I'll be here for questions at the end.
Well, Justin, I have a question for you right now. One just came in. So the question is, my wife and I have to make quarterly tax payments. Are there any ways that these are impacted by the CARES? Are there any way in which these are impacted by the CARES Act?
Yeah, good question. So there was a delay in when quarterly payments are due. While Peter takes over, I'm gonna look up the rules so I can give it to you with accuracy. But there has been effect on quarterly payments.
Okay, great. And one question came in here that I'll jump into real quick before we get into Peter, but it was, or another one, for kids that received a stimulus check, 17, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, what does Bobby recommend these kids do with the checks? If invest, what type of accounts and holdings? So that's a great question. So this is we all know either that what has benefited us or kind of wish we would have taken more advantage of the power of time and compound interest and just how beneficial that is. So starting out very young and investing is one of the best things someone can do for lots of reasons. Compound interest compounding being one of them. So my suggestion is if they are working and have earned income, you could contribute that money to a Roth. They could contribute that money to a Roth IRA. And even if they are working and have income and you want to contribute to the Roth IRA on their behalf, you can do so from your own money as the parent up to the amount of earned income they have, not to exceed the IRA limit. So in a sense, you could use this money to put it in a Roth IRA so that it grows tax-free over the rest of their lifetime. And the follow-on question about what type of account or what type of holdings, I would say very aggressive. Now's the time with the market being down. It's a great opportunity to take advantage. And so I would say to be very aggressive with an all-stock portfolio, maybe heavy towards small company stocks that have been beaten down significantly during this drop. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Peter Essley. Peter, you're on.
All right. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
You got me? Great. Let me just, Justin, I think you have to unshare there. Great. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. As Bobby mentioned, my name is Peter Essley. I am the Vice President of Investment Management and Research here at Commonwealth Financial. And we operate in a very similar capacity to what Justin described, where we support our advisors in basically anything they need, but our role specifically is to support them for any investment analysis, investment research, portfolio construction, you name it. If it's an investable asset or asset class, we provide insight and research for our advisors. So similar to Justin's group, really look at us as an extension of Bobby's practice that he can tap into as needed for any investment analysis and insight. But obviously for today's discussion is to give everybody sort of an economic overview, state of the markets, and both a recap of where we were, where we've come from, but probably more importantly is where we're going and where we're headed. So first, I just wanted to take a quick step back to recap some of the recent events, where this is essentially, as we look back into March and early April, this is where we were, and this is how we were feeling as investors. certainly towards the end of March, right, where there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of concern about the direction of markets. We had seen multi-day losses, in some case double-digit losses in certain asset classes, and there was a lot of angst and concern over where things were going. So as investors, this is how most of us felt. On Wall Street, they had a very similar feeling, where most traders at the end of the day probably ended like this and then proceeded to a stiff glass of scotch or something of that sort to try to get through those days in March. So why, we know essentially what happened, but let me just do a quick recap. So the event that we saw, the decline in the equity markets, and here we're just looking at the S&P 500, which is a broad-based large cap US equity index, saw its worst 20-day decline, worse than 2008, worse than 2001, really goes back to the Great Depression. So it's an environment that none of us, or very few of us, if they did live through it or have lived through it, probably were quite young at the time. But certainly nobody had lived through this type of an environment where we saw such a quick and immediate downturn in equity markets that it was really a shock and awe for most investors. And things ultimately, as we know, ground to a halt. And in that time, what we saw is that investors were shedding equities or stocks, any risk asset classes for the most part, in favor of bonds, fixed income bond investments. And here we're just looking at the US Treasury Bond Index. You can see that it has a very different profile than what we just saw on the previous slide, where these securities appreciated over the months of February, March, and April. On the business side of things, I'm sure you've seen the headlines. Things most certainly ground to a halt. And where we stand currently is most likely in a recessionary environment. But this chart just shows the two main focus areas of our economy. There's ISM services, where service industries make up roughly 80% of our domestic economy. The manufacturing area makes up about 20%. When these two metrics or indices fall below that dotted red line, that historically has indicated a recessionary period. And as you can see, those two gray shaded portions show the 2001 recession as well as the 2008 recession. So these are only showing the March numbers. We still haven't received April's numbers, which should come out in the next couple of weeks. But most certainly, you're going to see continued downward momentum in the manufacturing number as well as the ISM services number. Consumer confidence, which consumers make up roughly 70% of the domestic economy through consumption, took a massive hit in March as well. We still don't have the April numbers out yet, but we're anticipating here additional declines. And this is an important factor to keep an eye on because, as I mentioned, consumers make up the single largest portion of our economy. So if you have a consumer who is somewhat uncertain about the economic outlook, uncertain about where they are in their current employment, generally hold back on spending, especially with larger purchases, which tends to slow the momentum of the economy and puts it into negative growth mode. And then finally, just looking at the unemployment side of things. Again, I'm sure you've seen from a lot of the headlines that we've seen a stark increase in the unemployment numbers as we've seen significant job losses. The headline number shows about, which is called the U3, shows about a 4.4% unemployment rate, where the number that we generally like to take a look at is called the U6 unemployment number. And it's a more all-encompassing way to measure the unemployment or employment picture here in the US. And what the U6 does as opposed to the U3 It takes into consideration those folks who are marginally attached to the workforce. So those who have lost their jobs, they aren't currently employed. They're technically not in the labor force because they're not looking for unemployment, but they would, if job prospects were good, would easily jump back into the labor force or labor pool. It also takes into consideration workers who are employed part-time. So they're working part-time for economic reasons. They would like full-time employment, but they just can't find full-time or good employment currently. So as I mentioned, it's more of an all-encompassing number, and that puts us at about a 9% unemployment rate as the popular headline one, which is a little bit lower. Again, we expect this to continue to increase. Actually, the numbers come out tomorrow morning. So you'll probably see, if you open up any news reports or the newspaper, you'll see a stark increase in the April unemployment numbers. So where does that put us? Well, obviously I painted a pretty dire picture right there, but I'm actually quite optimistic. So on the left-hand side, I would say this is where we are currently, right? There are continue to be storm clouds on the horizon. There's lightning bolts, there's concerns, there's fractures in some of the employment pieces. However, I'm very optimistic on our future outlook, especially as we get towards the latter part of 2020. And I think we're going to see a fairly robust growth environment once we get through this whole COVID situation. And what I'm going to lead into here is reasoning why I feel that way, and why this differs from previous environments. The first piece is that we've had tremendous fiscal and monetary responses in light of the downturn that we've had. So the Federal Reserve, which controls short-term interest rates, was very quick to move interest rates lower. As soon as we start to enter any sort of turmoil in the economy and markets, they did so in early March, effectively bringing interest rates to zero. And the whole intention of that is to make borrowing more attractive, whether that's housing or for certain industries looking at machinery, looking for big purchases. The whole idea is to spur investment through cheaper financing for individuals and corporations. So far, that was a very successful move. As we know, it drove a lot of liquidity into fixed income markets. And that was really the whole intent, is to flood markets with liquidity, keep things moving, put some grease in the wheels so that we can continue to move along. In addition to that, we had very aggressive moves on the fiscal front, right? There were a number of programs that were announced designed to inject liquidity back into consumers, to individuals who have lost their jobs, help out with the unemployment picture. So this was much quicker, much larger, more swift than anything that we had seen in 2008. And I think both the Fed and the federal government have learned some lessons from that period that we went through in 2008, and were trying everything that they could do to avert a similar scenario playing out this time around that we saw back then. Because if you remember, throughout 2008, it was the Federal Reserve continued to decrease interest rates meeting after meeting, but it really took quite a while before we got to a reasonable level of rates for that environment. And then on the fiscal front, if you remember, through the latter days of 2008 into the early days of 2009, there was a lot of back and forth in Congress, in the halls of Congress, trying to get deals done, and it really just seemed like nothing could get off the ground, where this time around, both parties, for the betterment of the economy, were very quick to come to a deal, even though it seemed like from the headlines that there might have been a bit of a hiccup there. But pretty astonishing how quickly things have moved this time around as opposed to 2008. So another reason why I'm fairly optimistic on the rebound that we're expecting is that the job losses, for the most part, have been fairly concentrated in one sector of the economy, which is the leisure and hospitality sector. So that's restaurants, drinking establishments, hotels, cruise lines, etc. Now, it's certainly a tough thing. It's unfortunate. From a humanitarian side of things, you never want to see large job losses. However, from an economic side of things, the fact that the fallout has been fairly concentrated in one sector, and not only in one sector, but one industry of the economy, means that things are fairly contained. Up until this point, and again, the numbers are going to come out tomorrow, we haven't seen that permeate or bleed out into other areas and other sectors of the economy. And we've just seen minimal job losses in technology, professional business services, financial services, and other, even some goods producing industries as well. So it's an unfortunate situation. Fully realize that we've seen large job losses. We've wiped out all job gains since 2008. But again, it's been mostly concentrated in one area that, if and when things turn around, can be quickly turned back on. Another reason why I'm fairly optimistic and why this differs from previous environments is that the savings rate has absolutely skyrocketed. So why this is beneficial for the economy is it means that there's a lot of dry powder on the sidelines waiting to be put back to work as we migrate through and things start to ease up, which is not an environment that had existed back in 2008. Heading into that 2008-2009 downturn, you had household finances were in terrible shape. A lot of investors, consumers were overly levered, so they had taken out too much debt on home purchases, taken out too much credit card debt. The consumer is in exceptional fiscal shape, personal fiscal shape currently, and have learned a lot of lessons from that 2008-2009 environment. So an increase in the personal savings rate isn't a good thing for the intermediate term, because that means that people aren't spending, and that tends to slow the economy. However, the fact that that money is now being stockpiled for later deployment means that if and when things turn around, there will be a lot more injection, a lot more of an adrenaline hit to the economy than what we had in 2009, 2010, where most consumers were focused on paying down debt as opposed to getting out there and spending stockpiled cash. So from that side of things, very, very good shape. And as I mentioned earlier, 70% of our economy is driven by consumer purchases. So this sets up a pretty nice environment moving forward. And just a quick graphic, just to compare the two environments, households in 2007 versus where they are today. I think this is a pretty good representation. I don't know if my wallet's quite as fat as that, but it certainly looks better than 2007. And then finally, just to discuss the COVID-19 or coronavirus situation, I think we've done a tremendous job as a country at getting the new case counts to plateau, right? And the whole idea of the quarantine, social distancing, was not to fully eradicate the virus or bring new case counts down to zero, although that would be quite nice to do. The whole idea of the quarantining was to flatten the curve so as not to overwhelm healthcare institutions. And as you can see here, there's clear evidence that we've done that. We've actually seen, if you were to draw a trend line from March 29th out to May 4th, you can see that new case counts have actually, on a trend line basis, have started to decline. Again, that's a great thing. As we move into phase 1 and phase 2 of opening up certain businesses, you'll probably see this plateau a bit. Not expecting a significant resurgence back higher in case counts. because I think people are going to be very hesitant to, or are going to be more cautious with social distancing, certainly shaking hands, hugs, what have you. So it's again, from this side of things, we are very optimistic on the outlook of the COVID situation. So to summarize all that, like I said, if you were to take a snapshot of where we are currently, the numbers are probably going to continue to scare you over the next couple of weeks, but we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. We think that the consumer, the investor markets are in tremendous shape for the next couple of years. And we're certainly not anticipating any sort of a significant downturn from here on out. I know that kind of came as some initial projections where people said that we could be moving into a depressionary environment. And then as things started to look a little bit better, it moved to a severe recession. Now it's bumped up to, okay, well, maybe we'll have a couple quarters of negative growth. But we've come a long way from where we were in that first slide showing the end of March. So, and with that, I will turn things back over to Bobby.
Well, thank you, Peter. That sounds like we have some tough times in the near future, but as soon as we can get things going again, there's real reasons to be optimistic about our recovery and the famous shape of it. So thank you very much for that.
Right.
I think I've heard it said several times, this is a health event that caused an economic issue. It wasn't an economic issue to begin with. So between that being the case and the action that the government's been taking to shoot the stimulus money in, it's very different. It is very different this time. One of the few times, because normally we say it's not. The market went down, it's going to go up, but here it is different from that standpoint, being this is driven by a health event. So thank you. Okay, so let's see here if I can figure out how to share my screen back. Get this back on.
Bobby, while you're doing that, I'll answer that question from my session.
Oh, great.
So the relief does apply to estimated tax payments. If you had a quarterly estimated tax payment due between April 15th and before July 15th, you can wait until July 15th. So no penalties there. The September quarterly payment is the same, so there's no change there.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to go through three slides and a wrap up, and then if anybody has any questions, please email them to Mary@cummingswealth.com. We'll do our best to take them today or get back to you if we run out of time or need to research the answer. So this is what we refer to in the industry as a Skittles chart, and you can kind of imagine the name. We say if you opened a bag of Skittles and dumped it out on the conference room table, this might be what it looks like. And so we use this for demonstrating something that you'll see at the end here, or at the end of this slide. So we often start by asking somebody that we may show this to, do you see a pattern here? Do you see any pattern? And what this shows, let me backtrack on that. This shows each year since 2010, the different asset classes that we typically use to build a diversified portfolio. And it shows the highest returning asset class in that year all the way down to the lowest returning asset class in that year. And it does it from 2010 to 2019 across the board. And so we asked, do you see a pattern? And what the theme is here, this ties in with our traffic theme, beach balls, traffic, and sunscreen. This ties into the traffic. So basically, what I think most investors would like is for advisors to be able to predict the future, right? And know if it's 2009, December 2009, what should I invest in 2010? Wouldn't it be nice if I had the crystal ball to know that I should put all my clients' money, or someone should invest all the money they have in small cap growth stocks, because it's going to be the number one asset class? Well, unfortunately, we don't have that crystal ball. And what a lot of investors do is what we call chase return. So the analogy here, looking at, let's just use small cap value for an example. In 2010, it earned 24%. So that year, at the end of that year, when people saw how well it did, a lot of people may put a lot of their money, a high allocation of their portfolio, into small cap value. Well, look at what it did the next year. Oh, wait a minute. I don't see it. Where is it? Where is it? Oh my, it's way down there. So the year they invested, maybe they invested November, December of 2010, it earned 24%, put their money in it, and immediately lost 5. Well, man, I don't like this thing. I'm going to get out of this. This is a horrible investment. Well, look what it did the next year, is up 18%. And then, oh man, it did 34. I'm going to go back into that one. Maybe I should go there. And the next year it earned 4. Wasn't very impressive to others that are earning double-digit return. And then the year following, down 7, -7, up 31. And so what you see here is that, and that falls through all the colors, is our traffic analogy, right? If you're going down a 4-lane highway and all of a sudden the traffic in your lane comes to a dead stop, you might see the people in front of you, a couple of them peel out to get into the next lane over because it's still going. Well, inevitably what happens is that lane often stops as well, and then they jump back into the other lane. So the theme here, this traffic, is that we don't want people to be chasing returns, right? So you don't want to be building your portfolio that's, number one, not diversified, and number two, chasing the returns of prior years. So this just speaks to the need to stick with the discipline of a diversified portfolio. So I thought I would share that with you today. And then this one I think is a great visual. I'll never forget the first time I saw it. I would have failed the test if there would have been a test on this slide before I saw it for the very first time in my life. And what this shows is from 1980 to 2019, this blue line, I guess that's blue, tealish line, is the return of the market for the calendar year, right? So this year was 26 and 15 and 2 and 4 and down 7 and down 23. So that the blue is the return of the market. Well, what many people don't realize, because it happens often fast and thankfully it ends quickly, is the maximum drawdown within the year. Okay, and so that's what these dots are. So let's look at what might be considered a pretty extreme example. Well, let's see. Well, this is a pretty good one here. 1985. So 1985, the market earned a 26% return. So if you just put your money in the market at the beginning of the year, or were already in and left it there, you got a 26% return, which is about 0.6% times the normal market return, which was a great one. But the intra-year low, at some point, I don't know the date of that year, but at some point in that year, the market was down 8%. So imagine if you had pulled your money out and maybe locked in a loss when it was down 6-7% because you didn't want to stay with the plan, stay with the program, and then it shot up, going up 26%. That's back to the market timing too. And that conversation comes up a lot in times like this. And it really makes, to me, it makes sense. And it's hard to explain to clients how we believe it's impossible, not impossible, but very unlikely and very unpredictable to build a portfolio strategy that's based upon every year of timing when to get in and when to get out of the market or different asset classes, going back to that other slide. So again, I just think this is an amazing example of really how volatile the market can be. And looking here at 1998, at some point in the year, it was down 19%. That's a significant drop, but at end of the year, up almost 30%. So I again thought I would share that slide today. The intra-year declines are normal. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying we're going to end the year at a positive return by any stretch, but you can see there's very few occurrences where it doesn't come back within the year over that period of time. All right, so now our next topic, the beach balls traffic and then the sunscreen. So the sunscreen analogy is to be proactive and to try to control the things that you can control. You can't control the weather outside, but you certainly control the fact that you can put on sunscreen to protect yourself. And within your portfolio, again, back to having a diversified portfolio. We would rarely, I mentioned the 18-year-old have put all their money in small company stocks. If it's just a Roth IRA, that's very much a one-off. We would rarely not have a very diversified portfolio. So diversification can be your sunscreen, what we call a bear market bucket. And that's, specifically for people that are close to or at retirement or making withdrawals from their account, of making sure that you've got some money positioned to where it can't go down with the market. Or if the market goes down 20%, it's only going to go down maybe 3 or 4% to protect yourself. Don't panic is our message, is really our message today. I hope that came through, and stick with a disciplined long-term plan. Other things you can do, being proactive in this time. Peter mentioned interest rates. It's a great time to look at, refinancing your home or refinancing your business debt with interest rates as low as they are. So be proactive with that. And then certainly if you have cash on hand, excess cash on hand that you feel comfortable you're not going to need in the foreseeable future, now looking back, might be one of the best times to take advantage of the market. As everybody says, the stock market's the only place that people run away from when it's on sale. So that's not the right thing to do. So it might be a good time. And to continue to pay yourself first and take advantage of dollar cost averaging through your company retirement plans. Those that have been buying every pay period, as this market has been dropping, you've been buying more and more shares of your investments, and that's a great thing to continue doing. And then just remember, in the words of Warren Buffett, every 10 to 15 years, if we are lucky, he says, if we are lucky, economic skies will turn dark and it will briefly rain gold. And get outside with your bucket. And so the theme there is that buying low is a good thing. And so these are you have to capitalize. I've used the term all the time of making lemonade out of lemons. There's lots of opportunity, and we're doing things to take advantage of those for you. And just remember, America's not going out of business. We're one of the greatest country in the world, and the foundation is strong. All right. So in closing today, let's see here. Okay. In closing, I'd just like to thank everybody so much for attending. I hope you found it beneficial. I must say, despite being unhappy for the reason that we are here and having to meet in a Zoom setting like this, is a negative thing. It really, back to the silver linings in the cloud, it's been such a positive, invigorating experience for our client, for my team and I, in the so many conversations we've had with each and every one of you over the course of the last several weeks. And as some of my study group peers have said, guys, this is what we're built for. 30 years of building the team that I have to serve each and every one of you today, and it gives me great pride to know that we're here for you and we're acting proactively on your behalf. So if any of you have any questions, please reach out to us, shoot us an email or give us a call. And we're never too busy to help someone that you love or care about. So if there's a friend or family member that has some questions or concerns, please let us know. We'll be more than happy to help them. And so with that, again, it's not the way I plan to spend my 30th anniversary week in this business. Would have never imagined, but those 30 years have helped prepare me for what we're doing to serve our clients today. And we're really proud, again, that we're spending it this way to help you as our clients when you maybe need us the most. So with that, again, thank you again, Justin and Peter. Thank you for joining us today. And God bless you, and God bless your loved ones. Thank you very much.